So it sounds like
Um,
somebody shamed you at some point for getting on your soapbox. So you need to think
ah,
about that a little bit.
well, I
We
mean,
like the soapboxes.
I guess
I love
sure.
it.
Okay. Thanks for calling me out there, Jordan.
Welcome to the Creative Navigators.
We are two unlikely friends exploring resistance by examining the intersection of the creative process, productivity culture, and artistic expression.
All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us again on Creative Navigators. As always, I'm your host, Obed Caballero, and co-host Jordan. Say hello.
Hi, everyone.
Hi. And today we are joined by Rob Freund. Is that correct? Did I say that
Hello. Yeah, perfect.
right? Great. Great. Rob is a mental health professional and an artist, and he's joining us today to talk about uh, his creative journey. And Rob, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background, whatever you care to share.
Sure. Okay, so that's a really actually that's really hard to think about how to encapsulate the most important details. So yeah, I'm a mental health counselor. I've been working in the field for going on 13 years now. Went to FAU, got all of my training done there. I got the doctorate there, and then went on to teach in grad school for a while. So I was an assistant professor, kind of at a few different universities over the years. And more recently, even though I've always been practicing, I was working in substance abuse counseling for a while. I was a primary therapist and then a training director. And then I worked at a few other treatment centers, and then I worked in university counseling for a little bit. And then gradually started moving more into private practice space, just because it's way more flexible and whatnot, especially being an academic on top of it. And then this past summer, at the end of the summer, decided to transition into just being solely private practice. So I've just been doing that since about September. So I'm still figuring out that lifestyle and whatnot. But other things about me, aside from being an artist, which is usually my fun fact because I don't get to lead with that often. So this is actually really exciting for me. But I'm also a dad. I have a daughter of 7 years. I'm a former cultic Christian, meaning I came from a very conservative, very high control group background, which is why I can be gay and have a 7 year old because I didn't clue into some things until a little bit later in life. Um, Other things that are important about me. Uh, I don't know. I'm a nerd, but who isn't nowadays? It's kind of like the popular thing to be.
That's
Uh,
yeah, it's
I'm
very
an Aries,
popular.
if that's your thing. I don't know.
Uh, astrology girlies. So
Yeah, exactly.
cool. No, that's great. That's great. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I invited you on because of you have a pretty unique perspective, I think, as somebody who works in mental health, but then also, I guess, I don't want to say on the side you do art, but like how would you characterize kind of like the way that you work as far as like your artwork and your what you've produced?
Yeah, actually, I think on the side is probably a good way to put it because um, I really only started referring to myself as an artist, like whoever gets to like I don't unless you like get your BFA or something like that, like no one is necessarily like appointing the title, right? Um, so it was one of those things where it's like I just was someone who was really into art for my entire life, and so I would say like up until maybe the last couple of years, I wouldn't have referred to myself as that. So it's very much on the side. So it's actually been a lot of fun and personally very meaningful to like centralize it in my life a little bit more. Um, yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
I can
very
relate to
interesting.
that, being a wannabe writer my entire life, but never feeling comfortable calling myself a writer.
Except
Yeah.
if you're writing, then you're a writer, right?
Yeah.
Like that's the irony of it.
If you're
Yeah.
creating art, then you're an artist.
Exactly.
Mm,
Exactly.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And so you said you've been doing art your whole life, basically.
Yeah. In reality, you know, Americans are so weird. We lead with our career identities when we're doing introductions, and we place so much value on that and whatnot. So whenever people find out that I'm a therapist, they tend to assume that equates to a certain way of being by default. Like, oh, you must have always been like the really serious guy who was like the heavy reader and very intellectual and all those things. And it's like, yeah, I was a reader, but I was reading choose your own adventure books. I wasn't reading like Tolstoy or anything like that. you know and I don't think anyone starts off in their life wanting to become a therapist, because if you're 6 years old and you know what a therapist is, it's probably because you're going to one, and then like you're not also thinking like, oh, that's what I want to do, necessarily. So, but I was always making art. Like I would have when I was a kid, like that was the thing that defined me, and I grew up. In my earlier years, I was born in upstate New York, but then my parents were missionaries, and I lived for 5 years in Puerto Rico because my parents needed to convert all of the Catholics to the right kind of Christianity, quote unquote. And it was a very isolating experience. We were living in the countryside and whatnot, and I had my three older sisters, which left me as the only boy, just to my own devices a lot. And art was just something that happened. My dad is very much an artist in terms of he's a photographer. He does woodwork and stuff like that. And so, in between him working his day job and then his weekend job as a missionary, I would catch like these glimpses of him indulging in his art, and that was the thing that always fascinated me the most about him. And so, I mean, I was just always making shit, and as much as I could pursue it, I did. In the culture that I grew up in, being an artist wasn't really something that was a noble or honorable life path to pursue. Not just because of all of the naked bodies that you have to draw when you're in art school, and that's very ungodly. But also, like, I got a lot of the expectation to grow up, get married, have a family, follow this like very expected path, and so a career was about finding and pursuing something that you could support your family with. Um, and so, yeah, it wasn't something that I really gave myself permission to hone as a craft or as a way of being in the world. It was more of like it was a quirk that I had, and I tried to indulge it as much as I could, but it was always there,
And
and it was what I
uh-huh.
wanted to do. It was what I wanted to do for sure.
That was the main way that you wanted to like spend your time, spend your energy, kind of, yeah, focus on.
Yes, I spent a lot of time singing the Sound of Music soundtrack and then the Lion King soundtrack in the backyard while like playing in the shed. And so the lifelong dream was to be a Disney animator slash voice actor, and
Oh,
like that was my astronaut kind of thing.
was that so you really wanted to do it even like professionally? Like it wasn't just like a thing that you just like to play around with. You wanted this to be
Oh
like a
yeah.
life. And so you weren't able to pursue, or you just sort of life just kind of took you down a different away from that.
There was a little bit of so in the denomination that I grew up in, there was one professional artist. He was a graphic designer, and he was encouraging but also very like grounding about like the realities of working in the art world and whatnot. And he talked about the sinfulness of the art world and all of those things, and how it's all about pride at the end of the day because you're trying to sell your art, get people to notice it, and this, that, and the other thing. And So there wasn't an overt restriction to become an artist. It could be done so long as the kind of art that you were making was for the right purposes and it was the the right kind of art, glorifying God and things like that. Um, the pressure really came kind of within the family. There's a fair amount of like vicarious living going on from my parents towards me, which is like probably the main reason why I'm a doctor as opposed to like just a master's level clinician because you can with the degree that I have you can practice right out of the master's program. But no, we had to go for the doctorate, and there was a lot of overt pressure for that. I remember when I was graduating from high school, I only took art twice, once in eighth grade and once my senior year. And in my senior year, I was really looking at pursuing applying to art schools. So my family had plans to move down to South Florida to help out one of the struggling churches down here. And so I was looking at applying to what was it called? It was an art school in Fort Lauderdale that closed down uh, a couple of years back. It was like the Art
Oh
Institute
yeah,
of Fort
the Art
Lauderdale or
Institute.
something.
Yeah, that's where I went.
Yeah, so I was looking at going there, and then you know, all of a sudden there was more and more pressure to maybe not pursue that, and so then I got a sit down conversation about what does it mean to follow the verse that says, "When I was a child, I thought as a child, I spake as a child, I acted as a child, but when I became a man, I put away childish things." So then I was like, okay, I'll go become a history teacher. And my dad was like, well, don't become a high school teacher. You won't make any money that way. So then I was like, I'll become an English teacher. That's even better. And they're like, don't be an English teacher. So I took the Myers-Briggs, which, of course, as we all know, is the most reputable personality test out there. Spoiler, it's not. Um, but they said you could be an artist, you could be an English teacher, you could be a history teacher, or you could be a psychologist. And so being a deeply, deeply, deeply closeted gay kid, the drive to understand the self was something that kind of prompted me to pursue psychology as a major. And so literally it was like this whirlwind of switching back and forth between all these different majors before starting college and then in the first year of college. But the pull to go to art was always there. Like I remember uh, getting into clinical psychology programs is really, really challenging just because they're very, very small. They're more competitive, technically speaking, than going into a medical program. Because they admit 5 people for these programs, and there's such a limited number of them. So I got the grades, I did the research that programs that I was supposed to do. I was technically the right fit, but I just couldn't get in after my bachelor's program, and so I was like, okay, well, yeah, I was super depressed, went to therapy for it, and then I was like, I'm going to pivot and I'm going to pursue art. I'm going to apply to the Art Institute of Fort Lauderdale, and I'm going to go there, and psychology can still be useful for that. And it really led to this massive blow up in the family where I still remember very vividly driving home from church with my dad. My sister was in the front seat. And I sort of like broke the news of like, so I think I'm gonna do this. And it wasn't just me pivoting. It turned into me betraying God's leading in my life, and I'm being capricious, and I don't have any real sense of commitment to what God has told me I'm supposed to do, and all of this stuff. So it wasn't an option. Uh, so it was definitely a wandering path to get to the place where now, like I call myself as an artist. Like I'm actively, in the process of trying to create my online print shop, and I'm making a point in my life to set aside time to create art. Um, it's really nice to be in this place now.
Wow,
Yeah,
incredible. That's
I mean,
yeah, I mean, I
interesting.
definitely yeah, no, it is. I definitely understand a lot of that feeling. I mean, we've talked about it a little bit that I also come from a Jehovah's Witness background.
Mhm.
Um and I was allowed to pursue art, but it was kind of well, it wasn't really like, I don't want to say it was controversial, but it was kind of not really super um frowned upon, I guess I would say, you know.
You get that kind of like
Um,
askance, like side eye about it.
a little bit. Yeah, a little bit because, there were other goals that I should have been pursuing instead, or not really going so much for college. They don't really like encouraging too much college.
Mm.
Um, I should have probably done like Jordan Gone to Bethel. That's what they kept asking me about that instead. But
What's really ironic about our high control religion we grew up in is now they did pivot into all of their materials are now art, animation,
mhm,
videography. So like
That's
now that we
hilarious.
forewent pursuing those artistic passions, and now that's all they want from their
that's
members
what they
anymore.
want. A huge pivot to like media, like they're very much like a media company really now.
Mm.
Who says the church doesn't evolve?
Good point. Um, so I did want to ask a little bit about like your creative practice. So I
Mm.
know you do a lot of painting. Are there any kind of what kind of art do you like to produce? Just to start with.
Any kind of art that I can, honestly. And I know I'm not alone in this, where it's like I have that ADHD like magpie predisposition, where it's like if you can see the space above my computer here, I have like a bunch of stuff mounted on the wall, and it's like dried flowers and lots of string, and there's candles and just all kinds of shit. There's rocks and sand and dried fruit and whatnot. And like I love I was always a crafty kid, and I was always a crafty like adult too. So like I enjoy making fairy houses, and I got a pottery wheel off of Facebook Marketplace one time to try to see if I could sculpt. Spoiler alert, I can't. But but we'll figure that out at some point. Um, so I do a lot of drawing on my iPad. I do a lot of painting as well. But the painting is actually more of a recent thing because I'm such a perfectionist in that I'll get a vision in my mind and I want to create it exactly as it exists in my mind, and that is never going to happen. Namely, I think because I don't think that that's ever possible, even if you do have the training. But secondly, I don't have any of the training for it. Like I really don't have any formal technical skills that I can apply to my craft. So everything has to be trial and error, and that's always going to be messy. Um, so it wasn't until actually an artist friend of mine, uh, we were talking, and she was like getting a residency at the Del Rey. I forget what the I forget what the full name of it is, but it's basically like the art group there in Del Rey,
Mm.
the enclave of artists. And so I was kind of like gushing over her art and whatnot. And she was like, "Well, if you don't feel like you're good with the precise painting, she's like, just use a palette knife." And I was like, "Oh, what's a palette knife?" And then I was like, "Oh, you can paint messy, and it still turns
Yeah.
out okay." So that was really kind of what kickstarted playing around with painting. But I was more of like a sketcher and whatnot growing up. So I did a lot of cartooning and lots of drawing Power Rangers and gargoyles with all their nice muscles and things like
Oh, there you go.
that. So it's just kind of everything. Oh, I sew. When I was in grad school, I actually, speaking of our almost art careers, I I didn't mention this. I was 1 year into my mental health counseling program where I almost dropped out of that in order to go pursue an internship with the creature shop that the Henson Company owns in New York City, because I was a huge Muppets fan when I was growing up, and I got really into puppet making because my oldest sister, when I became an uncle, she and her husband decided they didn't want to have a television, and I was like, "You're gonna raise my niece without exposure to the Muppets and Sesame Street? Like this is unacceptable."
So
And
you're
there
like,
was
I'll
a
make them myself.
exactly. There was a rag shop next to the
Oh,
restaurant we used to eat at lunch, and so I just like went, bought the fur, bought the foam, and I was like, fuck it, I can figure this out. And then I really fell in love with puppet making as an art form and performing puppetry and things like that. So so I sew too. I want eventually to do drag. So I have my eye on some uh, textile design and stuff, but like we're gonna save that for when I have more space, I think.
But I did also want to ask about like I guess going into creative practice, like how do you I mean I have two questions, but I think I want to ask more about um do you think creativity like kind of comes into play with your professional work even though it's kind of like a separate thing? Like is there a way that you think creativity actually comes into your work as a therapist or clinician?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, in terms of the um like the barest components of what mental health work is, I think it's creative work. You know, the line between psychology and philosophy is so fine that most early psychologists like Freud, Adler, Jung, and whatnot, they were medical professionals. You know, they were optometrists and psychiatrists, or not. Well, I guess psychiatry technically didn't exist, but you know, they created the field of psychiatry, but they formed a lot of their ideas just by reading philosophy and then applying that to the lived experiences that they were seeing in the patients that they were treating. And I think fundamentally, the process of creating art is about curiosity, which is the fundamental component to all effective therapy. You know, what I used to tell my students, which was told to me when I was in my training program, was that the only thing that you need in order to be successful as a therapist is a genuine curiosity in the people that you're working with. And some of the most brilliant clinicians I ever had the pleasure of learning from um, all said the same thing. You know, the more a person talks about, um, not to make this too much about therapy, but the more a person talks about specific skills and training programs and these manuals and things like that, the less I trust them as a clinician, because the masters of the field that I have gotten to know, they go down to the bare essentials. And it's more about the basic ingredients of what makes psychotherapy work. And this one guy by the name of Jim Bitter, he's in Eastern Tennessee. Um, one of the most like one of the most Christian-like atheists I have ever had the pleasure of meeting. Like he just embodies everything that I grew up believing a person was supposed to be, and he has no religion associated with it at all. Um,
Interesting.
he once said, "Doing therapy is very easy. You just ask the next most interesting question," which is like a gross reduction of you know what you're looking for to get curious about it. But I think that idea of curiosity is an inherently artistic thing, because what prompts us to want to create to begin with, other than this sense of I wonder what it would look like if, or I wonder how I would do XYZ, or I wonder if I could recreate this or represent this idea or something like that. But even beyond the sort of the essence of therapy, there's a lot of creativity in the field. So there's actually under the auspices of the American Counseling Association, they have specific specialty divisions, and one of those divisions is creativity and counseling. So there, all of the artists and creative geeks get together, and we talk play therapy and you know create what kinds of artistry is done. Art therapy exists as a subspecialty of the profession. And in terms of my practice and whatnot, I do a lot of as much as I can, because I'm not trained as an art therapist, because you have to have an actual art degree to do that. But you know, I have an easel and I bring my markers and my canvases and things like that. And, you know, I've sculpted with my clients before. I also bring a lot of like esoteric stuff. So I have a lot of clients who are, you know, in the gay community, there's a lot of interest in astrology and in different forms of neo-spirituality and whatnot. So like I have clients that I'll read tarot with as a part of the therapy practice, not in the sense of fortune telling, but almost in a sort of like Jungian Rorschach sort of way. So I like to like, what are we talking about? All right, let's do the reading. What's standing out to you? What are you taking away from what's coming up, and how are we applying that to the conversations that we're having? Um, I do a lot of collage work with people, and there are a lot of resources for artistic interventions in psychotherapy. Um, so it really comes down to how artistic is my client. If my client is someone who's very artistic, we're getting really artistic together. If they're not, then I'll sneak in what I can, but I'm not gonna try to make the therapy something it shouldn't be.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of one of the things that I'm always like curious about is how folks, because I want people to think about curiosity beyond just like, oh, you're an artist, so you create, of course. I mean, you also happen to be an artist, but I was also very curious about how a curious creative mind and how there's so many different ways that that can be applied. There's so many ways that that manifests in one's life, in
Yeah.
mundane ways and in professional ways. And I just find like especially in the mental health field so interesting because the fundamental um what it is kind of it's a relationship, it's a communication between two people really. And I feel like
Hmm.
for me at least I consider creativity expression that's all communication really. So
Hmm.
it's like who are we communicating to and who the quote unquote audience is or who are the folks that are receiving it, and sometimes it's a back and
Absolutely.
forth. But I just find that really
It's
like fascinating. Hmm.
especially since too, like when you ask the question, which I think it's sometimes a question that's asked very cynically, what is art? Is a banana duct taped to a wall art? Is the Madonna made out of feces art? Is a toilet sitting in the middle of the room art? And if it comes down to art being something that stimulates curiosity and process, and it's a conversation between the creator and the observer, then yeah, I think that like so many things are art, not just therapy, but teaching is art. Even something like uh, uh, being a bank loan manager is art, right? Because it's just the art of navigating these specific systems and finding elegant ways of problem solving so that you both honor the job, but then you honor the needs of the people that you're working with too. And it's these a relationship is art. It's this co-creation of something out of nothing where everyone's bringing these random pieces together. And like I think that's like, not to be too romanticizing of it, but I think that that piece of curiosity and that idea of art is so fundamental to what it means to be human that like all of our expansion as a species, all of our evolution comes from that idea of curiosity and playfulness, and this idea of not being too beset by the idea of failure, uh, but taking interest in what failure reveals and allowing that to sort of become a foundation that just builds into this unlimited, or well, I'm sure there's finite boundaries at some point, but seemingly unlimited process of discovery, and I get so frustrated about that um, with AI coming on the scene in our society, where not only is it killing artistry, I think, like no offense to any of my friends who might be listening to this someday who have participated in this trend, but the Ghibli AI trend has filled me with
Yeah.
so much rage
Yeah,
every
same.
time I see it.
Yeah. Oh
Hmm.
yeah.
Um, I just, but even more than that, it's not even that
Wow.
it kills art; it kills
Curiosity.
curiosity. There are already
Mm-hmm.
studies coming out that are showing how routine use of AI is butchering critical thinking skills,
Hmm.
and critical thinking skills is just a fancy word for curiosity. You know, not to be too political, but like we have a president who's putting all these fucking tariffs on our society, and people who voted for him didn't know what a tariff is because when they hear the word tariff, they don't have the critical thinking skills to be curious enough to go, I don't know what that word is. Let me look it up and find out. And I really do think that my being an artist as an identity, as an essence of myself, comes from my father, not because he's artistic, but because of things like when we were growing up, my sister and I would have this game that we would play where it'd be kind of like parenting chicken. So if we heard a word that we didn't know, we one of us would invariably ask, "What does that mean?" And neither of us wanted to be the one who said, "What does that mean?" Because my dad's response would always be, "Look it up." And we had this big red leather bound dictionary that we would keep on top of the toilet that I would read when I was sitting on the toilet as a 6 year old because, things to do. But like, it was that idea. And my sister's a microbiologist. Her artistry took her in a different direction. But it came from that idea of like, you do not accept your own ignorance at face value, because there is something very powerful in the curiosity of discovery and in the willingness to just be humble enough to be like, I don't know what that is, but it's meaningful for me to find out, and that is something that we have gradually lost so much touch with in our society, and now we're just like we're taking it to the electric chair with our technology, I think. But anyways,
Yeah.
that's I'll get off of that soapbox.
It's funny that you bring that up today because just literally today, so my day job is I work in healthcare workforce education development, and I
Mm,
manage a program that for Washington State is to train healthcare educators to think more broadly about issues in health and healthcare. And I was talking to one of our instructors today, and we're trying to figure out like revamping the program to make it better. And one of the directors is like, I don't need to hire a curriculum developer because I can just use AI to create it. And we were just like, what? What's the
oh
point of doing that?
yikes.
And then talking to one of the instructors, so the people who's actually teaching this class that we run, she's like, she literally said, it's like people use AI to create assignments, and then students use AI to complete those assignments, and then people use AI to grade those assignments. So like, what is even the heck of the purpose of what any of
Hmm.
that we're doing? So I had never thought about the terms that you put it, where you said AI kills not only art, but also that curiosity being that fundamental component of critical thinking. So that's why the implications of AI overtaking art is much more broad than I think we've even started to accept.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And I find that really compelling to also talk about it in terms of curiosity, because I feel like this is something that Jordan and I often talk about especially when it comes to even like kind of the background of, this project of trying to kind of rediscover that curiosity, that drive, that
yeah,
motivation from when you were like a child, from
Hmm.
when you were much younger, where I don't know, you didn't have all these like external things that were like kind of tamping down on that curiosity, and the idea of freely exploring something was so much less daunting and more
yeah,
earnest.
Hmm.
Um, and so I just thought that was a really like elegant way of putting that.
Yeah.
Um, and I guess like slightly shifting gears in that way. So talking about artistry, creativity, and being an artist. So do you mind if I talk about or if we talk about a little bit about you just had a first piece in a show.
yeah.
Um and I had the wonderful honor of being able to see the opening of that show in the gallery, Arts
Yeah, and I so
United.
appreciated you guys coming too. It meant a lot.
Yeah, of course, of course. I mean, that's one of the things that like I've been trying to do is get more involved in the art community down here and support like if people are having like a show or I mean, I try to do as much as possible. It's like also part of, I work for our fund foundation, so we support a lot of like art organizations, and I try when I can to support in that way. But would you be willing to talk about a little bit like what that was like? How did that feel? Now that you had a couple of days to kind
Sure.
of process, I
Now that I
guess.
like processed and cried about it a little bit.
Aw.
I mean, first of all, I will say I owe you all of the thanks for it happening because you were the one who sent me
Oh,
the link to be like, hey, like you're making this art. Like I'd been sharing on my Instagram for a while that, just like the stuff that I was doodling. And I go through a lot of fallow periods with my art where it's like I just get so bogged down with other stuff in life and whatnot, where it's like, oh, has it been 6 weeks since I last picked up a paintbrush or something like that? And then in my perfectionism, I feel such a responsibility to be like productive with my art. So then, I was sharing some drawings that I had done, and I was kind of enjoying just like having something that felt complete after an hour and a half of working on it. So you sent me that, and if it hadn't been for those links, I wouldn't have even been aware uh, to submit something. And when I tell you that, like, this was the fulfillment of like a bucket list item. Actually, I'm gonna try like not to get too emotional talking about it right now because like I feel it. Um, a bucket list item that I genuinely did not think I was ever going to fulfill. Um, there are things that are on my bucket list, like mastering Spanish or mastering German. And I'm like, maybe I'll get conversational at some point, but we ain't never becoming a master, honey. Like that's just like, like I know myself and I know my time limitations. I know I'm never probably going to have the time or energy to participate in like a community theater performance or something like that. And I certainly didn't think that I was ever going to have the opportunity to have something that was in a gallery someday. Um, so yeah, going into it, I didn't start painting until a couple of years ago. So maybe about 4 years ago, 5 years ago. It was kind of shortly after my now ex-wife and I had left the church together. And I had time in my schedule because, with a lot of these high control groups, they control a lot of your time. So, Wednesday nights you're at church, Sundays you're at church most of the day. Sometimes, Saturdays routinely we would be cleaning the church. And then in a lot of other spare time, we'd be visiting people's houses for dinners and things like that. And so, all of a sudden we're not going to church on Sundays and we have time.
That's right.
For me, painting and whatnot was kind of a way of, or making art more seriously was a way of sort of like reclaiming parts of myself that had been compartmentalized and maybe disenfranchised from my main identity. Um, and so when you sent me that link for the submissions, like I call this my DIYG, like do it yourself gallery, because it's just like I need a place to put the art, so let's just put it on the walls. And so I was like, okay, I do a lot of nature-based art, and the theme for this exhibit, it was nature zone. And so I was like, okay, that kind of works out perfectly. Um,
That's why I thought of you. I was like,
so
oh, this is perfect.
yeah, I was like, oh, he knows me. Um, So yeah, when I got the news that this one painting had been accepted, I won't lie, I submitted three works and I was like hoping I would get three for three, but I was like, I was happy I got anything. Um, but the painting that they chose was actually like the of all the paintings that I have, it's the one painting that I'll ever refuse to sell because it was so I had to come up with a name, and because I'm full of dad jokes, I just called it Hair Today because I was like, gone tomorrow, whatever. Um, but it's of a
Yeah, go ahead, describe what it is.
it's a hare. It's not a rabbit. There's this part of me that always gets so miffed when people are like, "Oh, cute bunny." I'm like, "It's not a fucking bunny." But that comes from my own. And a lot of my work comes from my own sort of like post deconstruction spiritual explorations. And in the absence of identifying with any specific religion anymore, the one thing that consistently feels spiritual to me and that I do connect with very deeply is nature and is like the sacredness of human relationships and things like that. And so the hair as an emblem really sort of serves as kind of like a totem for myself in terms of like how I move through the world. Um, and so this painting is basically a very much a trial and error project because it started off where it was just meant to be like a very straightforward paint, brush strokes kind of thing. And then I messed that up, so then I had to pivot and try something else. And then for the first time, I painted with oils, and then I realized that oils take forever to dry. Um, so then we moved on from the oils, I went over it with the palette knife and the acrylics, and then we put more layers on the acrylics, and then more on top of that. And then that wasn't looking quite right, so we went over it with some pastels to try to like add some different textures and things like that. And then it still wasn't looking quite right, so then I wound up going over the rabbit. The final layer of the hair is with acrylic markers and whatnot. So it's like five different kinds of medium on this one thing. Um, and to me, it is the painting that captures my experience of my own spirituality. Um, and so for that to be the one that was selected was felt very profound because it felt like they chose me as opposed to they chose my painting. Um, and so leading up to the day, I was like very, very excited. And then Saturday rolled around, and I knew I was feeling a little anxious the night before. I didn't realize until about 4 p.m. the day of just how anxious I was feeling, even though it was like the least large of deals. Like there's no scrutiny going on. There's no one going, oh, but is it art? It's there, right? It's art.
Yeah.
And it's not like it's not like there are any stakes, but for me it was this like I am the uh there's a feeling of being an outsider a little bit because it's like I don't have any
Mhm.
background in this. I just love it,
Mhm.
I've never put myself out there in any public way before, and this is the first time that it's being seen. So, how legitimate will how legitimate will my art feel up next to these other paintings that I saw when I took the painting in the week prior, and I saw these like incredibly ornate, intricate, like technically impressive things where I'm like, you can see the skill that people put into these things. And my painting is literally like it puts the and crafts in with the arts. Um, and
Wow.
so I woke up on Saturday and I had all these grandiose plans of like I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. I'm going to work on some case notes. And instead, I very impulsively started working on an art project, and it was like literally 10 hours of working on this one
Wow.
thing that in the end I will never try to sell because the borders are off and I can tell that they're not equal, and so that will never see the light of public consumption. But I realized at around 4 p.m. I was like,
Oh my
you're
gosh.
doing this because you need to be working on art all day so that you feel legitimate when you go in amongst the other artists. And so then I went to
Oh
the
man.
gallery, and it was beautiful and lovely and it was warm. But it was just such a surreal experience. And afterwards, when I got home, I like got incredibly depressed. Like I just like
Hmm.
it was like all of the built up tension just finally was released, and I was like, I'm happy, but I want to cry like crazy. And I it just uh there's something about a dream fulfilled that is kind of like a small death of some kind. You know, as long as we're holding on to the idea or the possibility of a thing, there's a reason for being in it. And so now that this dream has been fulfilled, it's like, okay, so what do you do now? Um, and uh, it's very beautiful because I realize like there I can do anything, you know, there are plans that I have and whatnot. Um, and so it's like there's a it's like a beautiful kind of grief that I'm still kind of processing through, and I love it. So sorry, that was
That's
probably a
no,
super
that's
long-winded answer.
no, it's incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really timely that we get to talk about it now because it's like it's right after it happened, and I think it just puts like a
Yeah.
nice little cap on like, oh, your art journey. I mean, that's part of the reason I asked you to be here with us today because I knew you had, I mean, I didn't know all your, story like that necessarily, but I had a feeling that you would have a really like strong feeling about like your work and how it fit into your life and all that. So thank you. No,
You were
thank you
not
for
wrong.
being vulnerable and sharing that. I really
Yeah, of course.
appreciate it. Um, I guess just a little lighter note, maybe somewhat. I am curious to know about, so what, how do you find like the motivation or the drive to like keep working? I feel like that is something that a lot of times, well, even me, like that that is but like my main thing is how to find the not just like inspiration, like ideas and stuff, but more so what keeps you going in terms of being creative, creating art,
Mm,
like how does that manifest for you?
mm. I'm actually curious
Mm,
for you all about this a little bit too.
yeah.
But for me, like I said earlier, like I've gone months before without, especially when I was still working in academia. You know, it would be like, you know, the start of the semester and the end of the semester, and then nothing happens in between. Um, and I create fairly regularly because I hate who I become when I'm not creating. Um, there is something that is so sapping um, about when I'm not indulging myself in that way. I mean, for the longest time, indulgence was probably the best word to describe the experience because there, you know, no one's paying me for this. I'm paying out the money that I'm earning that I should be, you know, putting towards other things, you know, to just keep Michael's craft stock in the black. You know, it really is just that like I hate who I become. I feel so dull. I feel so two-dimensional in terms of how I um experience the world. I start losing that feeling of like gratitude and wonder that I enjoy so much about the world. Um and so I think the for one, when I'm creating, I feel the most myself. Um, like I feel the most purely me. Um, and I need that. I need to be connected to that if I'm going to be good at the other things that I have to do. Like if I'm going to be good at therapy, I have to be the most myself. Um, if I'm going to be a good parent, I have to be the most myself. I have to be plugged into the best parts of myself. Otherwise, those things suffer. Um, so I don't really feel like I have the option to not create. Um, yeah, yeah. But would you all say that that's true for you, or is it different?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
I
feel
could
like
weigh in on that. You
hmm
said something earlier that it is so me that you go through periods in life where you get bogged down. You'll go
Mm,
6 weeks without creating, and then you need to feel productive. That's kind of the same struggle that I have, where I'm the same. Like I need to create, I need to do something. I have these projects, and then when I finally start working on something, I get invigorated by it, and it kind of
hmm.
bleeds into every other facet of my life. And then something
Yeah.
knocks me out of that rhythm, and it takes me so long to get back to that rhythm. And the way you said it, I really like it. Like the way that most purely feel like yourself is when you're creating. And I've noticed it for myself that I do the best when I am still consistently showing up for that creative practice. So
Mm,
I feel the same way that you do, and I have that same struggle where if something knocks me out of it, then it takes me a while to get back to it.
mm. I
Mm,
wonder if that's just like a part of being human then.
That's
Yeah.
yeah, the Obed and I have a lot of these discussions about like how capitalism kind of extracts so much from us emotionally, physically,
mm,
mentally,
Yeah.
that just surviving the day-to-day grind of life eats away at that creative practice.
Yeah. I like to joke a lot about wishing that we could return to like a the Medici era where
Yeah.
you just patronize me, give me nice clothes and let me make nice art for you. But then we'd have to create for the church all day. Who wants to do that?
Yeah.
Anyways.
Who wants
Which I
that?
did. Well, that's funny because we all have this background of high control religious where I did like I
Hmm.
gave so much of myself for the church creatively or
Hmm.
even just my time and energy. And it's like it's
Hmm.
taken me years to come back from that burnout that I experienced from
Yeah.
how much of myself I gave.
I feel like I should say too, especially since this is a public podcast, I don't have such a beef with religion. I have a beef with the religion I came from, and that comes out in the way that I talk about
Mm.
religion sometimes. But, I specialize in working with spirituality in my clinical practice. And like, so I at the same,
I
as
like
much
that.
as I am critical of
You
religion,
like
I
claim
also
it.
have such a deep respect for it too. So yeah, I feel like I need to put
Mm.
that caveat
Right in the
on
middle.
Oh,
Can't stop.
it.
no, for sure. Um, yeah, I mean, quickly, I'll just say that as far as I don't know, I'm still figuring out like what drives creation for me. I feel like it's a little complicated because I have so much wrapped up in it. I mean, I was even telling Jordan the other day about like, oh, I think I have like trauma related to like
Mm.
even creating, drawing because it was I did go to art school, but I kind of always knew that I wanted to be an artist and work in like animation and things like that and just like a whole ordeal with going to school and trying to pursue that and so it kind of became very difficult to I don't know find a reason to still want to do it and I still do but
Mm.
it's just because I was hearing what you guys were saying about oh yeah it does feel good to it feels like you're being the most yourself when you're creating it feels like a very pure like moment and I definitely have that, but there's so many extra like anxieties around it for me that I'm what I've been trying to do is work on kind of addressing those anxieties so that I can actually create more openly, more easily, I guess you could say. But
You know what the difference is, though, is that for Jordan and myself, art is not as central to our occupations as it is for
mm,
yours. Talk about capitalism ruining things. I hear all the time people are like, "Yeah, you love to do it all the time until you get paid for it, and then once you get
mm,
paid for it, suddenly it's not enjoyable anymore." And so you've had to confront that not just in a lived everyday experience in terms of the work that you do, but you've also had to confront the challenges of wanting to be a specific kind of artist and then having capitalism be like, no, bitch, like I think that's
yeah.
traumatizing in and of
Oh
itself.
yeah.
I think you have listened to our podcast because I think we've had that discussion in
We,
one of
we
our
probably
just the two of us.
I'm a
yeah,
fan.
I've
That is very astute observation.
Yeah, very much. Anyway, off of me.
Sorry, the therapist kicks in.
Yeah. Um, no, I think we're just about ready to start wrapping it up. Again, Rob, thanks so much for joining us. Is there any like, how about, is there anything that you would want to share with somebody who maybe wants to be creative or wants to create art like kind of like maybe they don't think that they can do it because they're not trained or professional or whatever that type of thing but they're
Mm.
curious anything you might want to share with somebody like that or
Yeah, yeah. Well, first of all, thank you again so much, guys, for inviting me to this. This has
of
been
course
such a fun conversation. Um, and yeah, I'll say what I say to my clients all the time. I regularly encourage art and creativity in the clients that I work with. Not just because I value it myself, but because the research on creativity and play is so strong in terms of the positive effects on well-being and resiliency. Um, uh, I tell people it's not that you can be creative. You are creative. Period. Everyone is creative innately. The question is, what kind of creative are you? There's some people who are creative in the ways that we traditionally recognize, and then there are people who are creative in ways that are kind of counterintuitive and we wouldn't necessarily experience or we wouldn't interpret as artistry. But being able to take a rat's nest of data and put it into something that is organized and makes sense and cohesive, there is an artistry to that. Being someone who recognizes the best way that all the drawers, all the clothes go together in the drawers, or the best way that the closet gets organized, or something like that. That is not logistical, that is creative because you're imagining possibilities and you're putting things together. So if you enjoy folding your clothes and putting them into the drawers in just the right way, maybe you might enjoy playing around with some origami. If you enjoy data management or something like that, maybe you might enjoy putting together a collage, or maybe you might just want to put together some spreadsheets or something like that. But I also always go back to so what I tell people is don't worry about being the right kind of creative. Just create because you are inherently creative. There's just a story that you're telling yourself that says that you're not. Um, but I also like to go back to something that I learned from Brene Brown. She's kind of like a popular figure in the self-help field. She's a social worker by trade, college professor. Her research really took off around guilt, shame, and vulnerability. And I absolutely, if you ever listen to this, Brene, adopt me, please. I absolutely adore her. Um, but she talks about in one of her trainings, or I guess it's a workshop, but she talks about the art wound that almost everyone has, and people who say that they aren't creative almost always have a specific story that they can go back to from their childhood when they were led to believe that their art isn't good enough and they were shamed for it. And so she talks about how, when you're really little and you draw a horse that has eight legs and, the neck is a little more giraffe-like and maybe it's blue and things like that, people go, what a beautiful horse. You're so talented until you reach a certain age. And then all of a sudden a horse is supposed to look like a horse.
Yeah.
And then people go, well, you have other talents, you have other skills. And they don't realize how wounding that is to a developing child's psyche when you say you are only acceptable and palatable when you fit into a specific stereotype of commodity. And that wound lives with people their entire lives. And you'll meet people who have not picked up a paintbrush or a marker since they were 8 years old because their asshole of a teacher shamed them in front of the entire class. And I really wish that adults would think about that kind of stuff more often because kids are this is another phrase that I've picked up across the years. Kids are brilliant observers and they are very poor interpreters. So they don't know in that moment that when you're saying you have other gifts, sweetie, that you're just trying to comfort them because they're feeling a little insecure about their art. For them, you're making a global character assessment about their capacity because they've only been around for 8 years. They don't have context and they don't have the cognitive abilities to perspective take. So a lot of what I enjoy doing with my clients is like helping them to tap back into that and realize you were creative this entire time. And so I have someone that I'm working with right now who said to me, he's like, well, Rob, I make stick figures. And I'm like, so draw stick figures. You think that look at Keith Haring. What is his art except a bunch of stick figures? You know, so make fucking stick figures. And then he showed me the art that he was making, and it's like these incredibly realistic portraitures and whatnot. And I'm like, I'm sorry,
Wow.
where are the stick figures? You know, so yeah, that's my feedback. That's my advice. Just create. You are creative,
Incredible. Incredible. That was beautifully stated. Wonderfully said.
if not long-winded.
No, but it's valuable. It's a very valuable jewel.
So it sounds like
Um,
somebody shamed you at some point for getting on your soapbox, so you need to think
Ah,
about that a little bit.
well, I
We
mean,
like the soapboxes.
I guess
I love
sure.
it.
Okay. Thanks for calling me out there, Jordan.
No, I love it.
Thank you.
I mean, that's why I knew you were gonna come up with some really great insights. And I love it. You got me thinking about creativity in a different way too. And I feel like,
Awesome.
that's what we're excavating here. That's what we're exploring. We want to know what other people think about and how they feel about it. And I just think it was really beautifully stated. I can't even add onto it because it was so wonderful.
Well, thank you. That means a lot.
Of course,
And I'll work on the shame about the soapboxes too.
Take up the space. Take up all the space.
Um, well, once again, thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. That about wraps it up for us today at Creative Navigators. As usual, we'll have our links to socials. I have your, if you want to share your art socials, we'll share it with Jordan, and we'll put it in the description below.
Awesome.
And as always, just keep creating. And thanks for joining us. Have a good one.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for taking this journey with us. How are you creatively expressing yourself this week? We're gathering a community of creatives, so join us in our Discord or connect with us on social media. You can find all of the links below.